The sun hung low over the village, painting the earth in streaks of gold and shadow. Ajuma, the lonely widow forgotten by everyone, was sweeping her yard as she always did, her movements slow and methodical, her heart carrying the weight of months spent in silence. Each sweep of the broom stirred the dry leaves, sending little clouds of dust into the air. Every leaf seemed to whisper stories she had long tried to ignore. But that day, the whispers were different. There was a sound that made her pause, a faint, trembling cry, buried beneath the pile of leaves at the far corner of her yard. Her hands shook as she let the broom slip from her fingers. She knelt down slowly, each movement deliberate, as if approaching something sacred. The cry came again, fragile and muffled, curling through the hot afternoon air. She brushed aside the leaves, one by one, her chest tightening with anticipation and fear. Beneath the detritus, swaddled in a filthy, ragged cloth, lay a newborn. His tiny face scrunched in pain, his skin cold to the touch, yet alive, persistent, demanding life. Ajuma froze for a moment, her mind a swirl of memories and emotions. She remembered the child she had lost before, the one never given a chance to breathe the air of this world. She remembered the pain she had buried beneath years of quiet living, beneath the walls of her simple house. And now, as she looked at this fragile boy, it felt as if fate itself had returned a fragment of hope into her arms. Without hesitation, without questioning what she could or could not do, she lifted him and pressed him to her chest. The sound of his breathing mingled with hers. For a few moments, the world fell silent. The wind ceased its movement. Even the bent cashew tree seemed to hold its breath. The yard remained unchanged. The dust, the leaves, the sunburnt earth. But inside, Ajuma, something new had stirred. The house that had known only grief now held the soft, desperate cries of life. Her arms, which had long embraced only air, now carried a promise. Her heart, which had beaten only to survive, began to thrum with a new rhythm, the rhythm of choosing. To love without certainty, of protecting without reward, of holding on when the world had let go. Ajuma stayed there for a long time, rocking the boy gently, whispering to him words that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "I'm here. You are safe. No one will leave you again. Hush now, little one." Each syllable carried fragments of her life, her losses, her unspoken longings, and her steadfast resolve. The baby's crying softened, as if he understood that he was no longer alone. But the world outside her yard did not share in this quiet miracle. From the gate, Don Moina, a woman known for her sharp tongue and unyielding gaze, appeared. "Ajuma," she called, suspicion cutting through her voice like a knife. "What is that you've picked up from the ground?" Ajuma did not answer. She only rose, carrying the boy closer to her chest, and walked inside. There was no time to explain. The baby needed warmth, food, and reassurance. She lit the fire and heated water in the old, blackened pot that had once belonged to her marriage. She carefully bathed him, her hands moving with a tenderness born from both memory and instinct, cleaning not only his body, but the shadows of the past she carried. She wrapped him in the only clean cloth she had, the one scented with time, care, and lingering hope. As night settled, the stars shyly peeking through the reddened sky, the baby's cries faded. He slept, nestled against her chest, full and comforted, surrounded by a love no one had promised him. Ajuma did not sleep. She stayed alert, watching the rise and fall of his small chest, listening to the rhythm of a new beginning. In that quiet house, a story was being rewritten, not with paper, but with hands and hearts that dared to act when everyone else turned away. Morning came slowly, a thin mist rising from the hardened earth, mingling with the smoke of early fires. Ajuma wrapped the baby against her back and walked to the village, his tiny body secure against her. Each step was heavy with doubt, her mind racing with questions. Whose child is this? Where did he come from? Who would ever claim him? She wanted answers, yet feared them more. She hoped for someone running, crying, desperate to reclaim the boy, but deep down she knew no one would come. She visited Mama Chechende's first, the elder midwife known for knowing every story in the village. Ajuma called respectfully, and the woman appeared, wrapped in her colorful cloth, eyes narrowing against the light. Her frown deepened when she saw the baby. "Who gave you that child?" she asked, her voice cold yet curious. Ajuma told her of the cries, the leaves, the dirty cloth, and the silent night. The elder crossed her arms and shook her head. "This is not a good thing," she said softly but firmly. "A child abandoned. Like this is an omen." Without another word she turned and closed the door halfway, her heart closed to any hope. Every house she visited offered the same cold reception: astonishment, silence, and then the sharp slam of the door. The village that once ignored her grief now judged her choice to act. Whispers followed her like shadows. Had she not already lost enough? Now she sought to claim more grief? No one wanted to help, and yet the child's need was undeniable. By the time she returned home in the late afternoon, fatigue weighed on her body, and the rejection of the village weighed on her spirit. She sat on her doorstep and allowed herself to weep for the first time since her husband's funeral. She cried not only for the child but for herself, for choosing love without promise, for caring without guarantee, for standing when the world had refused to do so. And in that moment of tears, dust, and quiet determination, Ajuma made her choice. The boy would stay, not out of obligation, but because destiny had placed him in her hands, and she would not abandon him as the world had abandoned so many. She did not know how she would feed him, protect him, or shield him from the village's whispers. All she knew was that, as long as breath filled her lungs, he would never feel the sting of abandonment again. She stood, washed her face, and returned inside. She laid him carefully on a thin mat, improvising a cradle from a straw basket. It was not luxury, it was presence, care, and determination. In that simple act, the seed of what many would one day call a miracle had been planted. But for now, it was only a woman and a child. Two lives, fragile, learning to trust again, learning to survive together. By late afternoon, when the sky began to blush orange and the smell of burning wood drifted lazily through the village, Ajuma whispered, a name to the boy. It was an old name from the language of the ancestors, meaning the one who came to guard. She did not know why she chose it, only that something deep inside told her this child had not come in vain, that he carried something hidden, and maybe, just maybe, he would be the one to save her from herself. When night fell, it fell heavy. The sky was covered with gray clouds, and the wind blew colder than usual. It was as if even the weather knew that something had changed in Ajuma's house. For the first time since the death of Mosi, her husband, there was a sound in that home beyond the crackle of firewood or the hiss of pots over the flames. The sound came from little Seifu, crying with a strength that did not match the size of his body. Ajuma tried everything. She held the baby in her arms, rocked with her body, sang softly the same songs her mother had once murmured during fevered nights, gave him warm tea, pressed a heated cloth to his belly. But the crying did not stop. It was a deep torn lament, as if the boy were trying to give back to the world all the pain he'd swallowed since the day he was abandoned. It was more than hunger or colic. It was as though he were begging the world to listen, and Ajuma, even exhausted, listened. The memory of that last night beside her husband returned, like a shadow, his groan muffled by the sheet, the cold sweat, the gaze that drifted to the clay ceiling, the whispered prayer between clenched teeth, and then the silence that followed, the silence that stayed. Since then, her home had not known the sound of life. Only now, with Seifu's cries, did the space seem to breathe again. She did not complain. She did not curse. She did not give in. She only held him in her arms as one holds their own wounded heart. She stayed like that for hours, seated on the floor, her back against the clay wall, rocking slowly like a boat refusing to sink, even in the storm. With each movement, a silent prayer. With each sigh, a promise she did not yet know she was making. Outside, dogs barked in the distance. The moon did not appear. The village slept, but inside that simple house made of sticks and weary hopes, a mother was being born, not by childbirth, but by resistance, not by blood, but by choice. Little by little, the crying began to fade. As if the boy were listening to the rhythm of her heart and understood that here was shelter. There was no milk, no diapers, no cradle, but there were arms and there were eyes that did not look away. There was the warmth of someone who chose to stay. Even when the world turned its back, she did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury that did not belong to that night. But somehow dawn came, and when the first ray of light slipped through the crack in the window, she realized the crying had ceased. Sifu was sleeping, not deeply, but with a serene face, as if he had finally found a place where he no longer needed to scream. Ajuma looked at him and saw something she could not name. It was not only gratitude. It was a kind of ancient understanding. As if that boy, even so, small, already knew things adults forget with time. As if the two of them had been placed together for a reason that could not be explained by logic. Only by soul she rose slowly, stretched her aching back, covered the boy with a thin blanket, and went to light the fire. Another day awaited. Another morning to face the whispers of the village, the judgmental staa, the solitude that still circled like a vulture on the roof. But now she did not face it all alone. Into the water she boiled for tea. She placed marjoram leaves and a thread of hope. While she waited, she looked out the window and saw Donna Mina passing with a bucket of water on her head. They did not greet each other, but there was something different in the neighbor's gaze, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even respect, as if for the first time someone saw an Ajuma. Not the grieving widow, but the woman who had dared to love again without guarantees, without having been chosen. In the village. It was said that a crying child was nothing but trouble. But anew that on that night every tear Sifu shed was a stone lifted from his chest. A rite of passage, a baptism without water, made of human warmth and nameless faith. And even if no one else knew it, she did. That crying had brought life back into her home. And perhaps, just perhaps, destiny had chosen to begin right there with the tear of a baby, and the arms of a woman who not long ago believed her time for loving had already passed. Thason was already past its highest point when Ajuma realized something was wrong. Sifu, until then, restless and hungry, was now far too quiet. His small body was hot like a stone under the sun, his forehead damp with sweat, but his lips dry. There was no crying, no laughter, only a different kind of silence, the kind that screams. Ajuma pressed her lips to the boy's forehead and felt the heat rise as if his body burned from the inside out. Fever. High fever. The kind that carries the weight of childhood's hidden dangers. She wasted no time, took a cloth, tied Sifu to her back, and hurried along the dirt road, raising dust and drawing curious stares from the village corners. She went straight to the riverbank where Kokimo lived. The old healer who knew how to face stubborn fevers, pains no medicine could cure, and stories that hurt more than sickness. Kokamo lived in a low house surrounded by plants, roots hanging from the ceiling, bottles filled with colorful liquids on the table. When she saw Ajuma at the gate, her face strained and body bent. She didn't ask questions. She opened the door, pointed to the mat, and said, "Lay the child there." Her voice was firm but not harsh. It was the voice of someone who spoke to another's pain as though it were her own. Ajuma placed Sifu gently on the mat. The boy did not react. Kakimo ran her fingers softly over his belly, examined his eyes, smelled his mouth, murmured some old words. Then she went to the back of the house and returned with a bundle of leaves and roots wrapped in straw cloth. "It's a favor of a tired soul," she said, crushing the herbs in a gourd. "It's not just the body that's sick. He's afraid to stay." While she prepared a tea of Benedict root, Ajuma sat by the mat and told her story. Not all of it, only what words could carry. The widowhood, the silence, the child under the leaves, the cry that shattered her mourning. Kakimo listened in silence, only nodding. She knew some pains don't need to be cured, only shared, to become bearable. When the tea was ready, she blew 3 times over the gourd before bringing it to the boy's lips. Seifu whimpered but swallowed. With each sip, his eyes blinked slowly as though the fever was surrendering, as though his body was learning again, the arms where it rested. Then silence fell, and there, with the boy asleep, Kokimo told her own stories. She spoke of losing her husband to the river, of raising 3 children alone, with cracked hands and faith at the tip of her tongue. She told how once a child appeared at her doorstep, how that child later became her right hand. In old age, not everything life gives us comes wrapped in what we asked for. Sometimes the miracle arrives dirty, crying, and nameless. Ajuma listened with tearful eyes. It wasn't just the boy who needed healing. She did too. Healing from words that had never said farewell. Healing from the touch that never came. Healing from the fear of loving again. And there, listening to the old woman's stories, she felt something within her begin to ease as well. They stayed there until the sun went down. The boy still sweated, but the color returned to his face. He slept as if, at last, he had found a place. Before Rajuma left, Koimo handed her a small pouch of dried roots and said, "Boil this when the fear returns. It works for fever, but also for anguish, because sometimes it's the soul that burns." Ajuma walked home slowly, the boy lighter in her arms. As she passed the houses, she noticed some looks no longer carried the same judgment. 1 or 2 neighbors even murmured a good afternoon, timid but sincere. It was little, but it was a sign perhaps. With time, the village too would begin to see the boy not as a curse, but as a promise. At home. She laid Seifu on the mat, covered him with the cloth embroidered by her grandmother, and sat beside him, watching his breathing, steady, calm. There was a quiet peace in the air, the kind that makes no noise, but slowly takes root. And in that moment, Ajuma understood something that had no name, but that her heart recognized. Sometimes healing begins when we choose to stay, even when everything inside us begs to flee. And so, without ceremony or visible miracle, the fever broke. And with it, the stiffness in Ajuma's chest softened too. The woman who once swept leaves to forget, now welcomed what life had placed at her feet. And the lap, once empty of children, now served as refuge for the miracle nobody wanted, but that she had the courage to love. Time passed slowly, as all important things tend to do. The rains came, watering the hard earth with promises that sprouted little by little. Green once again tangled itself along the village fences, and the wind began to carry the scent of ripe mangoes and damp firewood. It was a season of new beginnings, even if no one said it aloud. And in Ajuma's house, that new beginning had a name: Seifu. With each passing day, the boy grew stronger. His curious eyes explored the world with the hunger of someone who had never known solid ground. He learned to sit, then to crawl, and at last to stand. His trembling hands pressed against the clay walls. Ajuma watched it all in silence, as one watches a rare plant bloom, after a long time hidden in the shadows. Every small step forward was a celebration without fireworks, but full of soul that the day Seifu took his first step was an ordinary day, one of those when the sky wakes up gray and life feels sluggish. Ajuma was sweeping the yard when she heard a stumble followed by a dull thud, the boy's body hitting the ground. She ran frightened, but before she could reach him, she saw him push himself up with effort and take 2 more steps, clumsy but firm, and he laughed. Laughed with a sharp, almost off-key giggle, but one that sparkled. A laugh that seemed to heal not only his falls, but hers too. Ajuma fell to her knees and embraced him tightly. She cried without shame, not only for his achievement, but for her own forgotten childhood, for her losses, for the silences she had swallowed all her life. It was as if, in that moment, Saifi's laughter washed clean the cracks in her heart. For there are pains that no medicine heals, only presence, and there are wounds that only persistent love can mend. The boy's laughter spread through the village, and the neighbors who once looked away began to appear at their gates. At first they watched with suspicion, then with curiosity, and finally with a faint smile tugging at the corner of their mouths. One by one they began to bring something, a handful of maize, a clean cloth, a bowl of porridge. It was as though the boy's laughter was undoing old fears, breaking the ice of rejection. Even Donna Moana, never one for tenderness, stopped by one day to see if the boy didn't need some leaves to strengthen his bones. And she stayed there longer than necessary, watching Seifu stagger back and forth, knocking over everything in his path with unruly legs. "This boy will have strong feet," she said before leaving. And Ajuma knew in that instant that something had changed, not only in the hearts of people, but in destiny itself. The children of the neighborhood, once forbidden by their parents to come near, began to play in the yard, at first shy, then free. Seifu, though not understanding many words, laughed, ran, stumbled, and got up again. Each fall was followed by Ajuma's embrace, and each embrace was stronger than the last. It was as if the two of them together were learning how to fall and rise, not only with their feet, but with their souls. In little time, the simple house that once knew only the echo of solitude became filled with voices, noises, small running feet, and laughter that reached even the dark corners of the roof. The old chair where Ajuma used to sit and remember what she had lost was now the place where she sat to watch what she had found. Not just any child, but a breath of rebirth, a gift dirty with earth and wrapped in abandonment, which revealed itself to be the purest thing she had ever held. And it wasn't only she who changed. Seifu did too. He grew with the lightness of one who had been chosen. Even without knowing the pains that came before him, his body carried the reflection of all the love he had received. He was not perfect. At times he cried too much, threw his bowl on the floor, woke in the middle of the night, afraid of the dark. But in every gesture, there was life. Life that had refused to end beneath the leaves. Life that now blossomed in the hands of one who had to welcome it. Ajuma knew the world would still be harsh. She knew that somewhere whispers would still circle about that widow with the fatherless child. But in that yard, under the crooked cashew tree, there was more than pain. There was laughter born from the womb of abandonment and turned into healing. A laughter that said, "Without words, we are alive," and that was enough. Time took charge of softening the pain like the wind that patiently smooths the wrinkles of a mountain. In the village of red earth and nights filled with crickets, routines began to fall back into place. Children ran among dry branches, men returned from the fields with tired feet, and women sewed, stitching the world together in small fragments between one thread and another. But something new was about to blow through. It was late afternoon when the stranger appeared. The sky was the color of copper, and the air carried the strong scent of wet earth. No one saw where he came from. He simply appeared at the edge of the road, walking slowly as if moving with reverence. He had no bag, no haste, only an old hat, a worn shirt, and a serene gait. The elders were suspicious. The young mocked, but no one dared to bar his way. His name was Malik, and he had eyes that were not frightened by what was ugly, nor dazzled by what was beautiful, eyes that knew how to listen. He did not speak much, preferred silence to questions, and perhaps for that reason it was hard to mistrust him. He wanted neither to buy land nor to sell promises. He said he came from where the wind never stops, and was only looking for a place where he could plant something and wait. Ajuma saw him for the first time at the market. He was buying a handful of bananas with counted coins and thanking as though he had been given treasure. She was holding Sifu and the child as if guided by something greater. Stretched his arms toward the stranger, Malik smiled, and without touching, made a slight nod as if to say, "I see you." Ajmer, accustomed to gazes that weighed more than they spoke, was unsettled by that light silence. She went home with her heart restless, not with fear, but with a strange sense of anticipation. That night, Seifu slept peacefully, as if he had found a forgotten piece of his own destiny. In the days that followed, Malik began to be seen more often. He did not knock on doors, but helped where he noticed need, gathering fallen firewood, mending crooked fences, chasing chickens out of gardens. He did everything calmly as if time were abundant, and the village, which at first frowned, began to loosen its shoulders. It was on one of those cloudy mornings that he appeared at the front of Ajuma's house. He didn't knock. He only stood there, looking at the cashew tree that shaded the yard. She came out. The boy balanced on her hip and asked firmly, "Are you looking for something?" He answered without hurry, "No, sometimes it's silence that finds us." They sat on the clay ground as if they had always known each other. She offered tea. He accepted with a nod. They didn't ask each other's names. They simply stayed there watching the boy play with a piece of gourd. It was as if time had paused to let them breathe. Malik looked at Sifu and said that there is life forged in silence. A child who grows where no one sows is a sacred seed. Ajuma used to defending the boy against others. Judgment said nothing. But for the first time that silence was shelter, not defense. She looked at the stranger and asked almost without realizing, "Who are you?" And he, eyes fixed on the horizon, replied, "Just someone who also waited for someone to arrive." The words carried no weight of mystery but of ancient truth. Ajuma could not explain, but she felt that this man carried the same holes she did not in the same places, nor with the same pain. But he knew absence, and only those who know absence can truly value presence. In the weeks that followed, Malik began, visiting the yard often, never intruding, never lingering too long. He simply appeared, sat, observed. Sometimes he brought something, a root, a tool, a toy carved from wood. He said little, but everything he said had roots. The village began to talk. Some thought he was a distant relative. Others whispered he carried broken promises from another land, but no one dared speak ill of him openly. There was something about the man that commanded respect, not born of fear, but of presence. Seifu, for his part, adopted him as part of the day. When he saw Malik, he ran as if time itself opened space for that meeting. Ajuma watched from a distance, her heart divided between caution and a hope she tried to smother. She had already lost too much, already patched herself together too many times, but there was something in that manner. Silence that did not demand, a gaze that did not judge, that began to soften the defenses. She had built brick by brick, and it was in that narrow space between pain and new beginning that Malik entered without promising anything, without wanting to fix anything, just by staying. And sometimes that is all life asks. Someone who knows how to stay. Someone who can listen to stories without prying. Someone who can welcome without promising to. Because in the end, the deepest stories need no words, only ears willing to hear, and hearts that recognize the other as a mirror. The rains gave way to the stifling heat that left the village drowsy and bodies slower. The leaves of the cashew tree cracked at the slightest touch of the wind, and cicadas sang their shrill chorus in the unhurried afternoons. In this familiar setting, Malik's presence became less and less strange, and more expected. He did not rush, nor disappear. He came like the morning sun, silent, steady, and without fanfare. Ajuma continued living her days with the serenity that only habit knows. She woke early, prepared soused porridge, swept the yard, tended to the few stubborn hens scratching in the corners of the house. But now something different marked her routine. Her eyes carried not only vigilance, they carried expectation. Too small, hidden, but present. She awaited Malik's steps in the late afternoon. She awaited his silence as one awaits a long conversation, and when he didn't come, she slept more restlessly, as if something inside her had been left unfinished. It was on one of those ordinary afternoons that Malik appeared carrying a basket. Inside were fresh fruits, roots, and a loaf of bread, still warm, wrapped in a linen cloth. He did not say where it came from or why he'd brought it. He simply set the basket on the ground, sat under the cashew tree's shade, and watched C play with Astic he pretended was a horse. Ajuma thanked him with a nod, but the gesture held more than gratitude. It hid a delicate sensation of being seen not as charity, but as a whole woman. After a long silence, Malik spoke. "I have a cabin further ahead on the path to the pasture, near the burity palms. It has shade, it has ground, and it has quiet." Ajuma remained silent, sweeping her eyes over the earth beneath her feet. He went on. "It isn't large, but it can hold, and one who needs peace." Still, she did not answer. And he, respecting the pace he had already learned in her, simply added, "I'm not offering because I think you need it. I'm offering because you deserve a place to breathe without fear." It was a simple offer, but in that context where every gesture carries the memory of many wounds, it was like a key handed over without demand. Ajuma lifted her eyes, met his, and asked softly, almost in a whisper, "And why me?" Malik smiled, but it was not the smile of conquest, it was the smile of a mirror. "Because I know what it is to be whole on the outside and still sleep with pieces missing inside. Because I know what it is to stay, even when everything else is gone." Ajuma did not reply at once. She didn't need to. Both knew that certain decisions are not born from words, but from silences well kept. That night, she lay staring at the thatched ceiling, thinking of all she had lost stand of what she now allowed herself to gain. It was not love, Malik offered. It was shelter, possibility, a new ground still unmarked, and that for someone who had walked barefoot over embers was worth more than any promise. The next day, she went with Sifu to the cabin. Malik was not there. The key hung from a nail on the door. Inside, the space was simple. 2 hammocks, a wooden table marked by time, a shelf with a few clay pots, and a window that opened to the pasture. But there was something there that could not easily be found. Peace, not the peace of empty. Silence, but the peace of presence that does not suffocate. She stayed there a few minutes, breathing the different air, smelling the old wood, listening to the distant sound of beauty palms swaying in the wind. Seifu ran around, stumbling on his own feet, laughing at an invented nothing. Ajuma stood watching as if testing her own place in the world. It was too simple for one who expected luxury, but more than enough for one who longed only for rest. In the days that followed, she began visiting often. She took Seifu to play while she swed or tended the small garden Malik had started. It was as if the space offered something the rest of the village had not yet learned to give. Freedom without judgment. Malik remained the same, saying little, doing much, looking deeply, and a yummer, little by little, allowed herself to exist beyond pain. The village, of course, talked. Older women asked questions disguised as concern. Men looked away with muffled laughter, but none, Of that mattered much anymore, because now when Ajuma returned home, she carried less tension in her body. And when she slept, sleep came lighter. She was still the same woman who once swept leaves with a broken heart. But now she swept with another rhythm, a rhythm not of haste to forget, but of calm from one who has learned topland again, even knowing drought may return. And it all began with a man who never asked where she came from. He only offered a place, and sometimes that is all someone needs to begin again. A ground, a silence that listens, and a roof under which one can breathe. Without fear, time kept its gentle dance, and Sifu grew in the rhythm of days that dawned without hurry, and fell asleep to stories whispered by lamplight. He was no longer a baby in arms. His steps were steady now, those of someone discovering the world with dirty feet and a clean heart. He ran through the yard, knowing that here no one would abandon him again. Each stumble ended in laughter, and each tear in an embrace. He was growing among invisible roots firm, though never planted. In the usual way, Ajuma was no longer only a widow with sad eyes. She was a mother, not on paper nor by blood, but in the truest sense, in repeated gestures, in tireless care, in patience, with questions, in sleepless nights. She had become the ground for a boy born of rejection, but raised in the lap of insistence, and it was on that ground that Sifu blossomed. Malik, for his part, had become a constant presence. He did not intrude, did not demand, did not impose. He simply appeared. And when he did, he brought more than roots and tools. He brought peace, the serenity of one who has no hurry to be accepted, because he already understood that the deepest bonds are not tied. They grow. With Sifu, the bond was natural. The boy awaited him as though knowing Malik brought something only he could give: time. One morning Malik arrived with a small handmade gift. It was a wooden horse carved with detail and care. When Sifu saw it, he broke into such a wide smile that his eyes nearly shut. He hugged Malik around the waist, and then ran through the yard, holding the toy high as if it were a trophy. Ajumar, watching the scene, felt a knot tighten in her chest. It was gratitude. It was fear. It was a joy that hurt, because it reminded her of everything she once thought she could never have. As days passed, the bond among the three became more than coexistence. It was an intimate community, quiet, full of simple gestures, heavy with meaning. Sifu learned to carry buckets with Malik, to recognize plants, to tie the right, not to keep the chickens in the pen. And on nights when he woke from nightmares, he ran to Ajuma's hammock, tucked himself under her cloth, and fell asleep again, safe from the world's threats. The neighbors, once full of suspicion, now came asking for recipes, borrowing flour, sitting on the front bench to chat about the heat. Malik's presence was no longer a cause for whispers. It was part of the landscape, like the old cashew tree or the crow of the early rooster. Even the men, once reluctant, began asking his help to mend fences, sharpen hoes, build covers for gardens. And Malik did it all with the same calm as if he had always belonged there. Under this generous shade, Sifu grew as anything well-watered does, strong but without hurry. His laughter was free, his curiosity alive, and his eyes shone with the light, known only to those who have truly been loved. He did not yet know the pains that came before him, nor the brave choices that kept him alive, but he lived as one who trusts that the world is in the end a habitable place. Ajuma, watching him play, recognized the miracle in the ordinary. She remembered the muffled cry beneath dry leaves and shivered at the thought that she might have turned her face away. But she hadn't, and because of that, now she had this boy running at her feet, dirtying his clothes, asking questions she did not always know how to answer, but always answered with affection. There were days when the longing for what once was still knocked at her door. Mosey's face, her late husband, sometimes rose in the steam of boiling water or in the silence before sleep, but it was a longing without weight, a longing that did not hold her back. It was like giving thanks for what had been while knowing there was still much yet to come. One ordinary afternoon, while Sifu slept in the shade of the cashew tree, Ajuma and Malik sat side by side, wordless. Their silence was comfortable. B gazed at the sleeping boy, and Ajmer, without turning her head, said he doesn't yet know how much he had to be loved to be alive. Malik answered softly, "One day he will, and he'll carry that with him like a root." That was what they were building. A home that needed no high walls, not idols, no ceremonies. A home made of shade, of silence that embraces, of laughter that heals, and of gestures that say, "Here you may grow." The sky that morning was different. A low mist embraced the village paths, and for moments hid the crooked cashew tree in Ajumer's yard. The silence was heavier than usual, as if the earth itself knew something was about to change. And it was the past, the one that seemed to have been buried along with the dry leaves in the yard, was now knocking at the door. This time with tearful eyes and bare feet. She appeared just before noon, her feet covered in dust, her clothes wrinkled, her face marked by sun, hunger, and guilt. She had the body of a woman who had lived too fast, with no time to care for herself, much less for a child. In her eyes she carried a weariness that was not just physical, it was regret that no longer knew where to rest. Her name was Soda, and she was Sefu's mother by blood. Ajuma recognized her figure from a distance, not by her clothes, nor by her face, but by the way. The boy shuddered when he saw her. Children, even without clear memory, recognize absences, and that absence now had a face. Seifu ran inside, not knowing what he felt, and Ajuma stood still, watching the woman approach with unsteady steps. "It's him, isn't it?" Soda said with a hoarse voice, cracked like old tile. I left because I had nothing to give. I was cast out. They threatened me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him. I swear. But I didn't know where to hide. Where to keep him safe." The words tumbled out as if trying to chase after lost time. Ajuma listened without haste. There was no hatred in her eyes, but neither was there eagerness to forgive. She looked at Soda as though facing a decision already made long ago. When the woman fell silent, she expected perhaps judgment, punishment, or even cruel silence. But what she received was something harder and purer. Ajuma stepped closer, her voice low but steady. "This child became a miracle in silence. Only stays with those who choose to love." The phrase was a boundary, not vengeance, a warning, a reminder that love cannot be improvised, that to welcome demands more than blood ties. It demands surrender, permanence, the courage to remain when everything else is gone. Soda collapsed to her knees on the packed earth. She wept with her whole body. It was a dry weeping from someone who had swallowed tears for too long. She tried to explain more, but the words tangled in her throat. "He's my son, but I'm not his mother anymore. Ammy?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Aduma neither confirmed nor denied. She only looked toward the house where Seifu was hiding and drew a long breath. In the village, news spread quickly. The birth mother had returned and, as expected, the comments began. Some said it was too late. Others thought Ajuma should give the child back. But those who knew the story closely, who had witnessed the midnight cries, the fevers fought, the first steps, the wooden toys, the silences embraced, those knew it wasn't about returning. It was about understanding what had been built. Malik appeared at dusk as he always did. He found Ajuma sitting on the doorstep watching the boy play without knowing how to react. He sat beside her without a word. She spoke first. The mother came back. He only nodded. After a long silence, he said, The love that saves never needs to explain itself, but sometimes it needs to make room. In the days that followed, Soda began to appear often. She did not intrude. She only sat at a distance, watching, trying to speak to the boy. Seifu, confused, sometimes drew near, sometimes hid. He was caught between instinct that recognized and bond already made. He was small, but his heart already knew the difference between constant presence and late return. Ajuma Steady kept the rhythm of the house. She cared for the boy as she always had. She didn't raise her tone, didn't soften her gestures. She knew the child was watching. And children see more than they say. They see who stayed. They see who was there. And one day, without needing to hear it, they understand that it was on a quiet morning that Seth Fu, seeing Soda sitting in the shade, walked over with one of the toys Malik had made. He handed her the wooden horse and said simply, "You can stay today." He didn't say, "Mother." He didn't say fear. He said presence. And that coming from Akhild was more powerful than any court sentence. Ajuma watched from a distance, and when Malik came near, she murmured, "I don't know if it's right, but I don't know what would be fair either." He replied gently, "Sometimes what's right doesn't look like what we want, but if it's done with truth, it doesn't weigh." That day, the house held a different silence, a silence no longer of abandonment, a silence of rebuilding. 3 women, one who bore, one who raised, and one who carried all the pain without counting the cost, and a boy in the midst of it all, teaching with small gestures that love needs no explanation, and only truth. That year's harvest came like a delayed blessing. After months of well-measured rains, of sun that ripened without burning, and of cool nights that cradled the growth of fruits, the earth responded with abundance. The cornfields swayed like a sea of leaves. The cashews dripped honey as they fell, and the cassava emerged thick beneath the soil like an ancient treasure waiting for the right excavation. Dot in the village harvest was more than food. It was proof that the people endured that even through loss, sickness, silent departures, and painful returns, life carried on its course. It was a time of gratitude, and the harvest festival was the one day when no one was left out since morning. The central yard filled with color. Bright fabrics hung between posts. Dishes were prepared in the communal kitchens. Old songs rehearsed by women's voices that knew how to harmonize with nature. Children ran, youths arranged the space, and the elders sat to watch sentinels of time. Ajuma hadn't been to a celebration in years. Since the death of Mosey, her husband, she had avoided any kind of noisy joy. It was as if inside her hope had learned to walk slowly without fuss. But now, with Sifu growing at her side, and Malik a steady shadow in the background, she felt something within her asking to take part in the celebration. Not to display herself, but to give thanks not to the village, but to destiny, which even in silence stitches miracles with patience. That afternoon she put on the cloth she had inherited from her mother. Simple, but with memory in every fold. She braided her hair carefully and slipped on the leather-strapped sandals she saved for special occasions. Seifu, excited, ran around her, asking that she tie his cloth, "Just like yours." Ajuma laughed and did as he asked. Seeing him ready, her heart beat with a kind of gratitude that cannot be explained. That boy who had once been rescued beneath dry leaves was now dancing with firm feet on the ground, ready to celebrate. They arrived together at the festival. The village received them naturally. There was no longer surprise. Ajuma, Seifu, and Malik were part of the fabric of the community, a thread that, though woven by chance, now supported part of the whole. The singing began with light drums. The women danced in circles, and the men clapped to the rhythm of ancestry. It was dance that healed, song that washed the soul. Seifu, enchanted by the sound, ran into the middle of the circle and began to dance as he knew how, clumsy, laughing, without shame. The children joined him and the circle widened. Ajuma watched from outside wearing a smile she hadn't worn in years. Then in an unexpected gesture, one of the ville's eldest women, Dona Kum, respected for her wisdom, and for words that never missed their mark, came to Ajuma and pulled her by the hand. "You've danced inside sorrow, daughter, now dance in the light." And there before everyone, Ajuma stepped into the circle with firm steps, eyes wet and soul light. She danced not for the feast, but for the passage, Malik from afar observed. He did not smile with his lips, but with his eyes. Those eyes that had always known how to see, what others overlooked, now shone with quiet pride. When Ajumar drew near, tired from the dance, he extended his hand, wordless, and she took it without fear. The gesture was small. But in the village, small gestures carry the weight of Eton. Night fell with the scent of hot food and sincere laughter. Bamboo. Fireworks cracked in the sky, lighting for seconds the faces lined by time. And Seifu, his face sticky with broth and his feet bare, threw himself into a yummer's lap, falling asleep there, as he always did when he felt whole. It was then that Soda, the birth mother, approached. She carried in her arms a basket of fruits she had harvested herself. She handed it to a yummer without a word, and in that gesture there was more than apology. There was recognition, not of defeat, but of respect, because those who did not know how to stay can still honor those who did. Ajuma took the basket, looked into Sorda's eyes, and said, "Hisn't mine because he was born from me. He is mine because life placed him in my hands at the right moment." And for the first time, Soda did not cry. She only nodded, for she knew that here there was no dispute, only a rare kind of justice, the justice of care. That night, as the village basked in abundance and old songs, a new kind of silence took hold. A silence of belonging, of those who know that despite the pain, it is worth remaining. Of those who understand that love is not imposed nor demanded, it is only lived with steadfastness, with surrender, with faith. And so in a yard filled with steps and drums, the story of that woman, that boy, and that silent man entwined with the story of all how were there. For family in that land was not always made of blood ties. Sometimes it was made of those who chose to stay. The next morning arrived with the smell of wet earth and the good silence that comes after celebrations. The village still slept when Ajumar rose. Sefa breathed peacefully in the hammock beside her, wrapped in the cloth he had used since he was small, now faded by time and by days well lived. Malik, seated at the doorway, watched the sky brighten, as he always did in silence. In peace, Ajuma prepared the tea slowly, as one who savors time. There was no rush, no anxiety, only that moment of presence where each gesture had weight and each sigh had its place. As the water warmed and the roosters began to announce the new day, she looked around the small house and realized the storeroom, once a place that held only drafts and cold memories, was now a room of stories. It was there that Seifu had stacked his first words. It was there Malik left his wooden tools. It was their life began again each night with the smell of porridge, the short evening laughs, and the whispered words of gratitude. And it was there, in that corner of clay and soul, that Ajuma Finley understood what had happened to her. It had not been salvation nor destiny. It had been decision, the choice to kneel before an unnamed cry, the courage not to return to the world what the world had despised, the strength to love without guarantees. That was what changed everything. Not a sudden miracle, but a sequence of small acts of resistance, of love, and of presence. When the neighbors asked how, they always asked how it had all begun. Ajuma never gave details. She didn't speak of fevers conquered, of sleepless nights, or of carved toys. She said only because a cry beneath the leaves brought back the spring I no longer saw. And those who listened, even without fully understanding, felt the truth of it, because truth does not need to be explained. It is felt. Sifu grew among stories and roots. In his eyes lived the curiosity of one who knew he was born of abandonment, but raised in courage. In his heart, the likeness of one who never needed to hear "I love you" in words because he had always heard it in gestures. He had two mothers, one who gave him life and another who taught him how to live it, and a man who, even without title, was the steady trunk where both could lean. Malik never asked for anything, never expected anything, but he found everything he needed by staying. And Ajuma, who once believed her story had ended with widowhood, discovered that happy endings sometimes look like quiet beginnings. Not all happy endings come with fireworks or applause. Some come with warm bread in the morning, shared shade, and a child asleep against the chest. In the village, people still spoke. Some said Ajuma had been lucky, others that God had rewarded her. There were those who believed in punishment turned blessing in prayer answered, in justice that comes with time. But Ajuma knew it had been choice, and above all, surrender. She never wanted to be a heroine. She only wanted not to turn her face away. And that gesture, the decision to look at an abandoned cry and not pass it on, was what made her more than a widow, more than a woman. It made her a root, and the village once distant learned from her. Learned that not every bond is visible. That family can be born from chance. That the strongest love is the one built in the margins of daily life. And above all, learned that sometimes what seems to be a burden is in truth the beginning of a disguised blessing. In the end, there were no speeches, no promises. There was only continuity, a life lived with dignity, with presence, with small faith, a kind of faith that doesn't need a stage, but moves mountains the size of loneliness. And so, Iduma, Seifu, and Malik carried on, not as heroes, Buddha's people with awakened souls, surrendered hearts, and steady steps on the ground they had chosen to inhabit, because a cry beneath the dry leaves had not been the end of anything. It had been the beginning of everything. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our